So welcome everybody to the Thursday Pivot. I really appreciate your taking the time to come on out and share the time with us. My name is Lori Power and I'm a group benefits specialist. So I build strategically focused employee group benefit plans. Part of our promise and commitment to our clients is to be consistently responsive. And part of that response was creating this weekly Zoomcast where we could bring people together in conversation, in networking, and highlight people like Lois that help us succeed through these hard times. The philosophy is all boats float on a good tide. We must support one another. I am a person who absolutely believes in taking a nugget away from every interaction, whether that's personally or professionally. And at the end of the day, I think I will have a good bounty of gold because I'm just stealing from everybody. Now, Lois is one of these people that's proof of networking. So a couple of years ago, we did your visioning course. How impactful is it if I can still find, and it wasn't hard to find because it's right there on my desk, the actual hard copy, not a digital copy, but the hard copy, the working document. And that is the power of Lois's message. Are you ready to gain more clarity and start making better decisions faster? And I went, yeah, of course. So Lois, take us through why vision.
Well, thank you all so much for being here with me and letting me be here with you and spend some time with you all. Lori, thank you so much for just connecting us and giving us this opportunity to talk about this concept of vision. And one of the things that, Janice, I'm so glad you brought up is this idea of visioning for different time horizons. And right now, I feel like a lot of people sort of have this sense that vision isn't so relevant right now because, you know, a vision is a long-term thing, right? And so, I mean, if I can't even think about what's going to happen in the next 5 days, how could I possibly think about what's going to happen in the next 5 years? Now, there are some people who feel like that's exactly the perfect time to think about what their 5-year vision is because everything is changing and everything's in flux right now. So perfect sort of breeding ground for them to really get clarity on that. But many people, again, feel like, well, I'll wait till the dust settles and then I'll think about my long-term vision. So I'm really glad that we're able to talk about this right now because hopefully you will leave today recognizing the ways in which visioning can still be extremely relevant for you personally and professionally, whether that's for your 90-day vision or, like Janice mentioned, talk about how to really have a vision just for your day. You can have a vision if you have a really hard call coming up today, a conversation that you're not looking forward to. Again, maybe that's personal, maybe professional, maybe both. Because I'm guessing, raise your hand if you've had a difficult conversation since the pandemic started. Okay, that's, yeah, pretty much all of us, right? So you can have a vision for a call that you're about to get on and really think about what would success look like for me when I get off the phone that has nothing to do with the person on the other end of the line, right? And a lot of people would say, well, that's absurd, right? I mean, of course it has to do with the other person. It's a two-way conversation. But at the end of the day, we have no idea that person's going to show up. We can't control how they act, what they say, what they don't say, what they do, what they don't do. But if we can really define for ourselves what would success look like for me, again, that isn't tied to that other person, and regardless of how the conversation goes, you can still feel successful about it. You can still feel good about it. And that applies for your vision for your day, your vision for the next 90 days, and again, you know, a long-term vision. So it's this concept of really thinking about a vision as a definition of success at a specific point in the future. And when we have this idea of a definition of success, I mean your definition, not anyone else's, and also not your past self's definition. So a lot of times people feel, especially right now, that they're feeling, even though they're very successful people, they feel like they're kind of failing to some extent every day, whether that's at home or at work, at both. And a lot of times that's because the old way that they looked at success and the old way they were able to achieve success is no longer available to them or not available to them in the same way. So it's really easy to go through that period of feeling kind of like a failure, but that's if we're tied to our old definition of success. If we're able to recalibrate and just recognize that it's time for us to have a newly defined definition of success, then we can sort of reclaim that, again, redefine it, recalibrate it, and really understand what that looks like for us in this new time and really sort of start moving towards that. Again, not sort of burdened by all these shoulds and how it was before and what everyone else thinks and all of the other ways people are pivoting in your your industry, that's great. That might be their definition of success, but I am not interested in that. I'm only interested in yours.
And I want you to go through that Harvard example. So
Yes.
if we take ourselves out of our current situation and assume that we were business students, right? Take me through this. Take me through as though I'm a business student and I'm attending Harvard as though I could afford the tuition.
Yeah, exactly. So, when Lori and I were talking, I just kept thinking back to this idea of, sort of like a case study. And I had the chance to work with this really cool entrepreneurial startup called SeedSpot. And it was sort of like an entrepreneurial boot camp for typically underrepresented people in the entrepreneurial world. And so on the first day, they did that kind of thing where they kind of pretended we were like in a Harvard schoolroom, and they passed out these sort of ridiculous scenarios. And they asked the different groups to come up with a sort of pitch for what they would do based on the scenario. So one was like, dinosaurs have retaken the earth, and now we have this issue, or now we're going to the moon every month, so now we have these problems, and right, so like crazy, absurd, ridiculous scenarios. And these groups of people came up with these phenomenal ideas. Like, I mean, in a crazy setting, but when you really think about it, like, it actually kind of had some legs. And so when we were talking, I said, if we all imagined we were in a parallel universe where Harvard was still ridiculously expensive, but everything else is different, and you were handed as your team this absurd scenario of a global pandemic, that keeps everyone at home, and you have to social distance, and you are part of that group, and you had been studying your field for however long, and you got in there, like, what would you come up with? If they, what would you come up with? And you would be so innovative, and you would be so fascinated by this idea of taking your expertise and applying it in this way that, of course, would never happen in the real world. But if it did, what would that look like? And I guarantee that all the expertise that you have gained, you're able to sort of step back from, again, the traditional definition of success in your industry and think about how you would create it. If you were creating it from scratch, it would unlock so much for you. And I have a cousin who is wildly successful in the Detroit commercial real estate world. He's like the czar of commercial real estate in Detroit. And I asked him once what sort of his mantra is. And he says, every day I wake up and I ask myself, if I were starting my business today, how would I structure it? And I think a lot of us get caught up in, well, this is how I started. And so I've got to kind of maybe tinker with a little, change it a little here, do a little that, push this lever a little bit, but it's essentially the same thing. And again, not that we want to throw everything out and it sort of think that none of that's relevant anymore. But if we were starting from scratch today, what would we do? If we were starting in this environment, what would we do? And I think that really puts a very different sort of spin on it. And again, I recognize that when you're in that Harvard classroom, you don't have anything but a grade, right, riding on your answer. And now we have livelihoods and people that work for us. And so I don't in any way want to minimize that. But at the same time, if we sort of take ourselves through that thought exercise or unlock that for our team, what could happen from that conversation?
Well, that's the power of transformation, isn't it? Over and over on Lois's site, if you have a look at the testimonials that are written about working with Lois and True North Vision, visionaries, it is transformation is one of those words that comes up over and over again. And I think you hit the nail on the head. Instead of turtling and waiting for the world to come back to what that normal is. And again, you and I talked about the 9/11 scenario. You may come out from your shell and realize the world is no longer there the way that you knew it, and you weren't able to transform. Take us through a little bit about how you worked with clients to take them out of that turtling and move them into that transformation.
So that's a great question. So there was one visionary that I've been working with recently who is, I'll give you an example of two. One visionary that I have worked with for years was in the security business. He still is in the security business. And so he staffed events. And so overnight, all that business disappeared. And I reached out to him and he had to lay off people. And he's one of those people who gets physically ill when he has to lay people off. It's not, and that's how he knows he's still human, right? So it was in no way sort of I had to do it. It's business. It's really, really deeply difficult for him. But I reached out to him maybe 2 days later and he said, my vision is still there. My destination stays the same. I just realized I have to change my vehicle. And I love, I love that idea of, it's one thing I always talk about. You have your vision in place. It's not a moving target. You have your destination. Your path is going to change time and time and time again, as it should. That's life. That's the excitement of it. That's being able to be nimble and flexible. And so we know our path is going to change. But when he just used that language of, yeah, my vehicle actually has to change too. I love that he literally overnight, his business completely shifted. He had to, this was not somebody who, yeah, the pandemic is happening and I have to wear a mask and it's annoying, but had to lay off a huge number of people, and the next day was able to kind of come back to that center of his anchor of his vision and know that he was still going to get there. That was a promise that he had made to his future self. And so he wasn't gonna default on that promise. And then another visionary whose business was going extremely well, so really benefited from everything going on in the world. Their business is really booming. And that person was talking about her vision, again, being an anchor. So when I always think of our life as like waves, right? We're at the crest of the wave and the trough of the wave, the crest of the trough. So one was in the trough and he really needed his vision to anchor him, right? And sort of hold on to it like a life raft. And the other woman whose industry was really booming during this time, she needed to have it be that anchor to keep her grounded and keep her remembering that she didn't want to be reactive like everyone else in her industry and just go after the most immediate short-term gains. She was on, and she has a 5-year vision. So she is beating that drum, and she's sticking to her fundamentals. And so at the end of the day, when all this dust settles, all those people in her industry who were being purely reactive and just going after those short-term gains, but ultimately sacrificing their long-term vision, she's not going to have that issue. But her vision was that anchor to help her sort of remember that oftentimes those opportunities are distractions disguised as opportunities. And that's ultimately sorry, Lori, go ahead.
No, that's exactly what I was going to say. My nugget that I took away from our last meeting was that distractions disguised as opportunities. And I'll tell you this, one thing from the pandemic that I have recognized is how many distractions I had built into my day as part of my method. Yeah. And now when you've had to get lean and you've had to get focused, I look back on that and go, I did that for 20 years.
Right. Well, it's so true. Another thing that I always, it comes back to this idea of decision making, right? Because a lot of times people think, oh, vision, it's like some dream and glitter and rainbows and cool, fine, go do your thing. I'm actually going to get to work. Or they feel like, oh yeah, vision's really important, but you like do it once and then it gathers dust, but that's fine. You check the box, right? And so in my mind, if your vision only inspires you, like that's not enough. It has to help you make better decisions faster on the small things, on the big things, personally, professionally. If it's not doing that, it's not serving you as well as it could. And same thing if it's gathering dust somewhere, it's also not serving you well. So, it's about what's my filter between what's an opportunity and what's a distraction disguised as an opportunity. And it's also, how do I know that I'm doing the right work at the right time? So you might be doing the right work, but not at the right time. And so many of us get caught up in that, and that's really, really easy to do. So how do we make sure, again, that we're doing the right work at the right time? I've heard so many visionaries, again, I'll talk about priorities. How do I prioritize? And I was working with a visionary yesterday on this, and the way that we sort of our inroad into that was, I could kind of tell she was a little startled because she was expecting that conversation to go really different. But the way that, like, the road that I sort of took us down to really get down to her fundamentals, her weekly fundamentals, to hit her 90-day benchmarks, right? We really had to rethink the way that she was doing everything. And again, not just take her system as it was and tinker with it a little bit, but kind of just like brush all that out to the side. Not saying we're going to throw it out, but just kind of like clearing this space and saying, all right, what are we actually trying to do? And then what are the things that are getting us closer to that? What are things that are getting us actually farther away from that, if we're honest with ourselves? And what are those things that are neutral? And then we're only focusing on the things that are getting us closer to. So I could keep going forever, but yeah.
No, I like that. This is the opportunity. Throw your questions out there. This is interaction. So you got questions, unmute. You want to say something, unmute. I know, and I'm going to pick on Tim because I had told him I was going to pick on Tim. Tim and I have had great conversation about his building the business. He's at the near to the start of his career. He knows exactly the kind of people that he wants to attract, and he wants to build that portfolio that 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 reflects that. Take us through a little bit about your visioning, Tim. Oh, did you see that face? He was like, oh, I'm not ready for this.
Yeah, it almost gives me a fresh start here. I'm not quite sure how new I am in the career here, but yeah, essentially went
You're
through
closer to the beginning than I am. Let's put it that way.
hey, your words, not mine. I so I was so I had previously been like an advisor through a career channel, and really like the questions that you were asking about, like what does success mean to like on a personal level, kind of resonating with me because that's a question I asked myself a lot probably like 2.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So ultimately, I wanted to create a firm where the reality was essentially no different than what I could envision. So that to me was the epitome of success. And so how I wanted to accomplish that was essentially changing my billing practices, what the client experience would be like, and on a day-to-day, ultimately trimming my operations to the point where I could pass on savings to the client. So all three of those things are really essentially important to me, and removing the commodity factor of financial planning and really implementing some sort of like tangible, profound, and enduring experience. So that was kind of like my thinking in how to structure and bring to life like this whole notion of what is essentially a client friendly advisory experience.
What are some questions, Lois, that he should be asking as and we should all ask, not just as I picked on Tim, but what are some of those key questions that we should ask almost daily of ourselves?
So, and Tim, I just want to, I'm sitting over here beaming just here. You're clearly a natural born visionary, right? Just that ability to really sort of think about what you wanted to create and then work backwards and figure out how you were going to do that. So it's so easy to just jump straight to the how, right? Especially if there's a problem. Well, what's the problem? What are we going to do to fix it? And we get bogged down in the how. We bulldoze right past why are we even doing this? Where are we going? When are we going to get there? What's it going to look like when we arrive? Right. And so I love that you decided what that future was going to look like, and then you work backwards and figure out how to get there. So, when you're thinking about your vision, again, we talk about that definition of success at that specific point in the future. And so one of those questions is by when, right? When do we want that reality to be in its full form? So my current vision is for June 1st, 2022, right? And so it's not for the year, it's not for a month, it's for a specific day. And I will literally get to that day of that month of that year. I will read my vision out loud, and it will be the reality that I've created around me. And my vision is 11 pages long, so it's a lot. Right now, some of my visionaries, their vision's 5 pages long, so it doesn't all have to be that big. But the idea is it's not about the length. It is about really fleshing out this picture, this sort of memory of the future. And I collaborated with this amazing gentleman named Kevin Bailey, and you can find him on LinkedIn, but he's a visualization expert, and he used that phrase, memory of the future, and that just really stood out to me. And so, Tim, what you're doing is you are creating that very salient memory of the future. So I want to get back to, well, I'll dive into that and then a broader question. So another question. So Tim, you beautifully articulated so many of the different pieces, the customer experience or the client experience that you want to create, sort of that profoundness that you want to create, the savings that you want to pass on. It's something very different than sort of what is the commoditized transactional situation going on in your industry. And so I always think about, so tell me more, right? I want to know, let's say it's 2023, imagine it's 2023 right now. What would your best client just have called you yesterday and said? Let's say it's 2023 and you look at your calendar, what's on your calendar and how is that different than what was on your calendar in 2020? It's 2023 and you walk into a room. How do I know that you've grown as a leader without you saying, hey, Lois, I've grown as a leader. Can't you tell? Right? Like, how would you carry yourself? What would you be carrying something? Would it be different? Would you have a magazine in your hand that you hadn't read in the past, but now you're featured on the cover or inside? So what are those things that when you really flesh out all those different aspects so you can feel it and taste it and touch it and smell it, right? I want us to sort of get there. So a lot of times when I'm working with a visionary and they're sort of fleshing out what that vision looks like, they have so many amazing ideas. And I I'm like, let's keep digging, flesh this out for me, make me feel like I'm there, really take me on a tour of your office here in 2023, or tell me about how you interact differently with somebody on your team and what they say about how much you've grown over these past 3 years as their leader or as somebody who really cares about them. So what are some of the biggest success stories that you've had from clients here now in 2023, right? And we talk about it like it's already happened. So all those things, you're totally in that space. And the more you can, again, really get down to that specificity around the timing, make sure that it's written down, that you have it all written down, and then it's shared. And I always, like in sports, I know nothing about them, but I think they say score early, score often, share early, share often. You want to get that vision in as many people's hands and in front of as many people as you can. And I guarantee you, people are not used to going to a LinkedIn profile and seeing it is, like for me, June 1st, 2022 and blank. That's going to be a pattern interrupt for them. They're, or if they were to see that on a page of your website or a blog post, or you send clients a letter dated whatever 2023, and you say, I'm writing you from this future part of my business, and I'm so glad you've come with me all the way. You know what I mean? Like, there's so many things that you can do with that, but the more that you're sharing what that vision looks like, it becomes a tool for you to filter, again, better decisions faster, creating that filter for ideal clients. It becomes a filter if you're going to bring people onto your team. And we always, how are we going to integrate the vision into hiring, into recruiting, into selecting, into retaining? All that comes into play with your vision. How do we use it for, Lori?
I was going to say, and then I'll get to you, Janice, in just 1 second. I was going to say, Patty and I, you've brought up this a couple of times, and Patty and I have talked about teams, right? And you and I have spoken about the leader, the founder, the team lead, the management, and how we may have a vision. How do we get that? And you probably would say it better than I would, Patty, but how do we get other people to buy in to what we envision, because they are part of that? You have to pull them along with you in order to get to that future self. Have I kind of put that out there? Maybe Patty might want to say a little bit more.
No, I think that's awesome, Lori. And just as I'm listening to you today, Lois, I do have an upcoming meeting that's a difficult conversation. And one of my questions in my mind is this an open conversation, or has a decision on this issue been made? Mm-hmm. But I'm thinking right now that my vision for that experience is to tell my story, so that even if a decision's been made, they have an opportunity to change it based on my vision, right? So how do you get other people on board? I mean, I'm thinking that you tell the story, you engage that part of their brain that will bring them that excitement that you have over your vision. But what do you think?
Yeah, so the excitement piece is critical, like you mentioned, Patty. And I'm so glad to hear that the idea of this vision for this conversation is really kind of helping you think through. That's huge. And that way, again, whether a decision has been made or not, that doesn't affect your success at the end, right? I always think of, you don't want to leave your success in somebody else's hands so that they can either bestow it upon you or take it away. And earlier that might have felt like that. And now you get to hold on to your success, and as long as you know that you showed up the way you want and told your story, then that is success. And we'll see what the decision ends up being. But in terms of teams, so this another organization that I'm working with here in San Diego, they had always done their annual planning process where the two co-founders went into a room and figured out what they wanted the next year to look like. And then they would come back and tell it to the executive team, and they would get some more ideas and flesh it out a little bit more. And then they would go on to tell everyone in the company about it, right? That was just like the way it's always been done. And I came in and said, well, that's all fine and well, but if I'm going to guide you through this visioning process, we're going to turn that on its head. So you got to be ready. And they were like, we are ready. So the way that I take people through the visioning process is really making sure that we are involving as many people as we can on the team as possible up front. So I think of the visioning process in 3 levels. The first level is deep discovery. Deep discovery. The second level is crystal clarity. And the third level is the roadmap and recalibration. So we create the roadmap, and then we're consistently recalibrating that roadmap. So in level 1, we need everyone to be there for the deep discovery, because they are going to have insights and perspectives that we never could have ourselves because we're not them, but also that would have stayed buried forever if we didn't involve them. And so one of the organizations that I work with works with companies on their organizational health, and they use the phrase helping everyone have their fingerprints on the process. And so when you bring as many people in your organization as you can up front into that level one, then everyone in that room has fingerprints on that process. And so these co-founders, again, who had always done that sort of standard model of their annual planning, were blown away. The CEO had a huge realization that he was a root cause he was the root cause of all the problems. And he had historically been somebody who found it very difficult to verbalize that. And he had this sort of profound realization, and in front of 18 people on his team was able to say that. And the level of respect and credibility that he gained from that was immense. And so not only was it an opportunity for him to hear all of their perspectives, them to hear all of his perspectives, but for all of them to sort of have that realization. Then during level 2, that's when you bring it down to, you create that filter. So whoever the buck stops with, maybe it's the owner of the business is just in level 2, maybe it's 2 people, maybe it's, the co-founder, maybe it's the 3-person executive team, whatever it is, they're coming together for that level 2. So now we've done the deep discovery, we brought everything up to the surface with everyone. Now everyone sort of has created their version of the vision for where the organization is headed. We got to filter that because, maybe, Joe over here says that his part of his vision is that the company, retreat is on a cruise ship every year. And you're like, nah, no, I don't think so. Right. Or maybe, Tom over here said something and he's like, in purchasing and he never says a word. He came up with this phenomenal idea and you're like, we definitely want that in the vision. Or somebody else says X and you're like, we love that, but we really got to flesh that out more. So that is the level 2. That piece of the crystal clarity is that whoever that person or people are, who are the buck stops with them, they're the ultimate filter. We flesh it out. We spend the entire day. I interview their future selves for a day and I transcribe it all, right? But you can do this, you can understand how this could work if you were thinking about it and doing it in sort of a self-guided way. Then the third level, where we're creating that roadmap, where we bring everyone back. And we're saying, okay, so you were part of really the deep discovery. Now we've just filtered it down and distilled it. And now we're sharing this finalized vision with you and they're seeing themselves in that vision. And then we're saying, okay, so now we need to figure out the how. How are we going to work backwards and get there? And we recognize that you're the boots on the ground, or you're the person closest to the client and I'm not anymore. And you're going to have insights into the how that I never would have even imagined. So they are bought in on the front because they're part of it, and they're bought in on how we're actually going to get there. And I've heard from so many people who are part of that day one that they are so grateful that it means so much to them that the owner or the co-founder or whoever it is at their company thought enough of them, valued their opinion enough to be part of that conversation. And so I'm going to start working with this other organization here in San Diego that does a lot of shipping, and they have a lot of people who work, it's not minimum wage, but right, they're working with people who aren't necessarily executive level. And those are going to be some of the most important people to have in that level 1. And once we unlock and give them permission to share their ideas, I promise you, I always tell people, let people surprise you. If you give them this tool of visioning, they will surprise you.
And that's a good opening for Janice. Can we get to your question as well?
I think you really answered it, kind of going through those 3 steps. My question was around like the difference between the goal, so the actual metrics and the things that you measure, and the vision being more of that overarching idea. But with your 3 levels, you've sort of brought those things together. So that makes sense to me.
Well, and Janice, I'm glad that you brought up this idea of like, okay, what is the freaking difference between a vision and a goal? Because it seems like, are they the same? Are they different? Like, what's going on? So really quickly, there's 2 key components. One is what I think of as the goalkeeper principle. And that is, if you have a goal, that often implies a goalkeeper. And oftentimes we set goals that have a goalkeeper. So you can imagine if you're, again, I know nothing about sports, so go with me. Let's say you're on a soccer team, you have the best coach, you have the best mindset, you have the best nutrition, you have the best equipment, you have the best practice, you have the best whatever. You can like be so geared up and ready to make that score that goal, right? But there's also a goalkeeper, and that goalkeeper has been training to make sure that you don't hit that goal. And they have all the things on their end, and they have their coach, and they have their, right? So often we create goals that are ultimately in somebody else's hands. And we can end up being really frustrated because we're not hitting that goal, but we're not recognizing when there's that goalkeeper in place. Now, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't have those goals that, you like for instance, I had a visionary who said, I really want to be in the top 30 under 30 in Birmingham and back in Alabama. And I said, all right, let's create a little bit more intentional vagueness around that, because that's a very clear goalkeeper. The publisher of that magazine might have a favorite niece who gets the 30th spot, and it's not because she's any better, just because he liked her more. So let's say something like, I've been recognized in the local press. Now that means that absolutely you could be top 30 under 30, but now we've removed the goalkeeper because there are ways where you can absolutely go out and make that happen. Now he ended up getting 30 under 30 as well. But since we had created some intentional vagueness around that sort of goal, he ended up seeking out so much more because he wasn't so myopic around just that one award. And the amount of spreads that he was in Birmingham, it was like he was everywhere. People were like, what's going on? Like, I can't open a magazine or open the business journal without seeing your face. So that's really critical. The other piece is that oftentimes people tell me that they've always had goals, but their goals aren't inspiring them anymore, and they feel like their goals are like yelling at them. They just look at their page and it feels like their goals are just like, hey, why haven't you done me yet? And then what do you want to do? You just want to throw it on the ground, because no one needs someone else to yell at you in your life every day. So goals can sometimes push, and a vision pulls, right? Our vision always pulls us forward. And it's like, you can't push spaghetti, you can't push a noodle, right? Like, sometimes pushing doesn't work. We don't have any leverage that way. And sometimes our goals are like that. It's just like this old, dry, dusty goal. Ugh. But our vision pulls us. And the other piece is that very often old school traditional goal setting is very like stair step. It always has to be more and better and more and better and more and better. And vision doesn't have to be like that at all. People are like, oh, this whole 10x your life. I'm like, that sounds terrible. No, thank you, right? So a vision can be, actually, my vision is to step away, or to slow down, or to not care about that thing, or to realize that that's everyone else's definition of success and not mine. And, maybe I hit it out of the park last year in terms of revenue, and actually maybe my definition of success this year is not more revenue, it's same revenue, but I actually get to like spend time with my family this year, right? In a traditional goal, that no one's ever going to think that's good enough, but we don't care because it's your definition of success.
I love that. Now, I have been told privately by more than one that we have to have you back in the near future, because a half an hour is not long enough. And people want to know, what's Lois's goal and how did you go through that process? So I have to get a commitment from you to say, we are going to bring you back and you're going to take us through the Lois experiment.
I love it.
The Lois example. So thank you so much for coming out. The 30 minutes, I told you, it flies by so quickly. So I thank everybody for coming out today. If you've enjoyed the interaction and the networking, I hope you will come back again. And also remember, my day job, my regular job, what keeps me employed is that I'm a group benefit specialist. So if you know somebody, or you have somebody who's interested in a benefit plan, perhaps they can give me a call and we can all get through this together. I'll take good care of them. So until the next time, please accept this as my handshake to you, thanking you for coming out and networking with us.